Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, and in this segment I'll be covering what I consider to be the 9 most common errors for beginning orchestrators. To start off with, I want to explain that I don't feel it's necessarily negative to make mistakes. But if you recognize those errors, it gives you a chance to develop yourself into a stronger artist. That's what we'll be focusing on today. Unconscious borrowing is the most common error for a beginning composer. You're so full of excitement at the prospect of composing that you inadvertently quote melodies, maybe even whole passages from another composer without meaning to. And then your violist will point out that your grand theme sounds just like the 1812 overture. The solution? Literacy, pure and simple. The more music you absorb at first, the more varied your influences become, and the less you end up emulating any one particular composer. And by reviewing and listening to many pieces many times, you can listen for any accidental copying in your own music. Balance in scoring is a lifelong study. It's made even harder by today's technology constantly trying to convince your ear that certain textures are possible, even commonplace in a live orchestra situation. The biggest culprit is film scoring, where relatively weak instruments are often boosted in the mix. Almost as bad is the playback on scoring software, which can make a well-balanced score sound bad, and a badly balanced score sound terrific. The only sure way to avoid this is to have a realistic grasp of the strength and character of the different registers of each instrument and section. Avoid processed sounds as much as possible and base your instincts on live orchestral performances. And use your internal orchestra as a guide, not the playback button. A dull-sounding score is usually the result of the composer being too fixated on the musical idea and not enough on the flavor of the moment, the color of the sound picture. Or it can simply be a case of inexperience with orchestration or being too conservative. How to fix this? Score read, score read, score read. Absorb how great orchestrators use all the elements at their disposal to move the music forwards through an ever-changing and ever-developing world of sensation. Pay close attention to how the use of color underlines tension and release, anticipation and resolution, and try to realize your own emotions through the expressions of each line, each texture, and each contrast. I'm simply seeing too many scores nowadays by young composers that are more about what musicians can barely do rather than what they can do well. Maybe you don't realize this, but asking a professional musician to do something incredibly difficult, time-wasting, and possibly injurious to their technique is an insult when, after all that effort, no one can make out a note of what they're trying so desperately to play. Extended techniques are fine and part of the growth of orchestral repertoire. But all extended techniques all of the time is just a pain for everyone, and doesn't prove anything except that you're incapable of writing a score that anyone will want to play. So please, get more savvy about each player's limitations, and understand that musical taste relies in part on the beauty of the music in a musician's hands. A lot of early compositional efforts really don't say very much. They can be timid, bland, and somewhat vapid. While this is an acceptable stage in writing solo pieces or chamber music, when you're getting 60 or 70 people to play your music, you should really attempt to say something significant. My suggestion is to develop not only your score, but yourself. Read great works of literature and philosophy. Watch films from different time periods in different countries. Travel to other continents if you can afford it, and if you can't, then read up on other cultures, befriend their people, eat their food, listen to their music. Vladimir Horowitz used to insist that his piano students improve their minds outside their musical studies, and it's even better advice for composers. Then there's the flip side to the last mistake. Going too far in the other direction, smashing the audience over the head repeatedly with your hysteria, or talking down to them from your high mountaintop of obviously superior intellect. Here's a message to all my musical Byrons and Einsteins. You have to decide whether it is your goal to indulge yourself or your audience. Yes, you must have deep emotions, and you must impart a deep sense of intelligence, but even more importantly, you must have artistic maturity. A sense of proportion can balance these poles, and result in a work that is a monument to both expression and form, like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, say, or Ravel's Piano Concerto in G. This is different from unconscious borrowing in that you are trying very much to sound like someone else, and succeeding. Well, actually, this is a typical aspect of a composer's progress, but you shouldn't spend your whole life trying to sound exactly like your favorite composer. Most composers start to find their voice by saying something new under the influence of older models, and then gradually learn to distill the new bits more and more into an individual sound. You might just find in your quest to be the next Jerry Goldsmith or the next Arvo Pärt that you run into your own style along the way. I'd say you should make yourself into your own favorite composer. All too often, I'll read a score where the brass are doing everything, all of the time, and there are barely any strings anywhere. Or a trumpet will be playing a melody that would be better off on oboe. Or the flute will be competing with the other winds while playing in its bottom register. What's worse, the natural beauty of each instrument is ignored, and they are treated as simple bits and pieces of sound in a very contrived, unnatural sound picture. Listen, the orchestra is not made up of instruments, but of people. These people exercise their musical ability based on their technique and command of repertoire. If you want to score effectively for them, then you have to become very familiar with that technique and repertoire and embrace the essence of each player's possibilities. This is a relatively recent trend, caused by the relationship of music to software. Some scores I've heard recently can sound very artificial, pushing towards an ideal sound picture that is too perfect and not organic enough. I'm also hearing composing that uses a more computer-based approach, with lots of repetitive cutting and pasting of phrases and textures that seem to be trying to imitate a synthesizer. I suppose that some of this is a matter of taste, but keep in mind that attempts to attach an artificial framework onto the orchestra have been tried in the past, and were mostly abandoned as being too trendy. So whether or not you're going this direction on purpose, watch out. I've made many of these errors, and in some ways I had to make them in order to build my own artistic personality. How I solved them shaped my style and sound, and using my own outlook in the process helped me to find my own unique voice. What was important was that I didn't let my critical voice interfere with the pure act of creation. Only in the editing stages would I get tough on my ideas, and sometimes not even then. I revised several of my works as I became more in demand as a professional composer. But nowadays, I avoid revisions, except to extend the performing life of a work. There are some pieces that I know could be better, but I've had to just let those works go and move on to newer, higher challenges. So, in conclusion, I recommend never making the path of self-improvement a negative one. Instead of saying, "What am I doing wrong?" always ask yourself, "What could I do better?"